So I'm Hackasays, pseudonym, and I was presenting Build a Tesla Coil, the way Tesla built them. What brought me to the conference originally, I didn't really want to go. I'm not a public speaker, but it turned out I'm a student of Eric Dollard, as is Griffin Brock, as is Adrian Marsh, and it turned out that there's fewer than 10 of us that could construct a proper Tesla coil the way that Tesla built them. So it was more of a lecture of necessity. And there weren't a lot of people follow Eric, but they don't seem to have an idea where to start. They're fascinated by the stuff he does. They're amazed at the mathematics, that everything's complete. And yet, because of all that, I think it's a bit overwhelming, so nobody knows where to start. So the lecture that I intended, I work on a bunch of different things, but where it started was I wanted to lay a breadcrumb trail for all of the people that started where I was several years back, and give them basically a fundamental place they could start, wind a very simple Tesla coil and some simple experiments they can do without a lot of equipment, without a lot of skill, and bang, bang, step by step, so they can get up to speed as fast as possible. And the more people that are up to speed and actually working with this, the faster we'll make progress, because there's only a few of us doing this, so if you double the people, we quadruple the progress. On the short term, there is no practical scale because we're more or less in unexplored territory. There are some practical applications that we can do with this once it's fully explored, and some things that I laid out in the presentation. I did have to gloss over a few things because first time presenting, of course, there's a little stress, and I got through all the slides, but there were some tangents and things I wanted to touch on. Applications. I think it's more interesting just as an open field to explore still. That the world of Tesla is such a complicated, he made such great achievements in his time, view it from a different lens on the world, yet he had such great success that basically there's a big field that we haven't explored yet related to his coils, his technology, all this. We'll say the mindset of the 19th century, and Eric Dollard being a great asset in that field, because he represents that era. If you follow and study his work, he doesn't use anything after Einstein. He is a very, very old school engineer. He uses very simple concepts, very simple math. So in the 19th century view, or the 18th and 19th century, electrical engineering was a brand new undiscovered field. We didn't know about vacuum tubes. We barely knew about batteries. We didn't know what you could do with electricity. So there was a large number of engineers in that era that were building and experimenting. There was Faraday, there was Lorenz, there was a huge line of inventors. And then the people that we know today, the Faraday, the Ampere, the Watt, which were more of the mathematicians that helped lay the groundwork of studying the fundamental. And in a sense, the modern lens that we view electrical engineering from is sort of everything post-Einstein is sort of a billiard ball model, where the world, the universe, all of atoms, everything is little billiard balls. So you break up the world, you get little atoms. And then if you smash the atoms together, you get little tiny particles. So if you break the big billiard balls, you get tiny billiard balls. And they formed a structure that works, that makes good mathematical predictions, but I think it's viewed I think it has some fundamental flaws the way that we're thinking of it. And I would comment that you can have a very accurate model that makes very accurate predictions, even though it's operating from false assumptions. So not very long ago, only a few hundred years ago, the geocentric model treated the Earth as the center of the universe, with the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, all revolving around the Earth. And they had mathematicians, they had astronomers, and they formed a coherent, predictable model of the universe, and it was accurate. It was really, really accurate, 99.9 whatever. Their model was accurate enough that with little tweaks, we could launch space probes today to other planets, successfully land on them and return, using the Earth as the center of the universe. What was the difference between these two? Instead of they made accurate predictions, they had a couple problems. Once in a while, Mercury would go wonky, it would go the wrong way, but 99.99% of the time, it was perfectly accurate. Today, we have a model of electricity and electrical engineering that billiard balls create magnetic fields and create electric fields, and that these manipulations of the little billiard balls is what leads to electricity. In the 19th century view and prior to that, I wouldn't say the consensus, but there was a prevailing view that electricity might be the dominant force in the universe, and that what we viewed as matter and atoms and subatomic particles were in fact electrical phenomenon and not atomic phenomenon. So they generated the same formulas and the same principles inverted, the same formulas that we use today, but operating from the opposite assumption. Very similar to the geocentric versus the heliocentric model that we use today. So the point is that they're equivalent in most practices, and yet they're completely opposed in principle. So there's the academic view of Tesla, and then there's, we'll say, the fringe view of Tesla. So the academic view of Tesla says that he was operating in conventional transverse electromagnetic electricity. There's no magic, there's nothing interesting here. We understand everything he did. He has nothing to offer us. The sci-fi, or we'll say the fringe view, is that Tesla was indeed a very ecstatic and we'll say accomplished inventor that did things that we don't understand today. But sadly, they don't do as many of the rigorous experiments or actual. They don't work in the practical world in the way that can change the world, the way that historical electrical engineers have done. It's sort of, we're wandering around the world, but if we don't have a compass or a map to figure out where we're going, to be able to explain what phenomenon is and what we're actually working with. So you might hear someone that believes Tesla did neat stuff. They'll use something like scalar waves. So what do you mean by a scalar wave? What speed does it travel at? How do we create a scalar wave? How do we detect a scalar wave? What's the propagation characteristics of a scalar wave? So if someone writes a book about Tesla and they use we could almost say a buzzword without being precise, and Adrian touched on this a lot, that we're not really saying anything. We're using a buzzword. It doesn't give us anything to engineer. It doesn't give us anything to model. All it is an empty slogan. So I think both of those worlds, despite one being incredibly formal and one being incredibly informal, neither one of them provide us much opportunity. The only people that can bring us further are people that are able to actually follow Tesla, usually going back to the original notes and the original people of his era, because it was a prevailing view of that era. And the people like Eric Dollard that more or less live in the 19th century can help us bridge that gap, because not only has he reconstructed most, if not all of, he would say most of the experiments of that era that Tesla did, but also he's laid a mathematical foundation. Not that everyone can understand it, but I don't understand all of it, but I understand most of the concepts and principles. And I noticed they're simple enough that it's algebra. I can actually, if I sat down and spent a weekend, I can actually figure out some of this stuff. And I have on the side time, but it's not the convoluted academic view that's layered in 4 pages of equations that take 10 years to even understand. People like Dollard present us a very useful opportunity to bridge the two gaps between what Tesla actually did and what we can actually do today.
And he does it through measurements. You can plug the equations in and you'll get the same results.
Within a very good margin of error. It turns out, well, one of the things I presented was a Tesla coil calculator. And between myself and Griffin, we worked out We took Eric's notes, and we took all of his formulas, we put them all together, and we put it on a web page. So you calculate, you can pick the frequency, the size, the wire, a few different characteristics, and it'll spit out what a Tesla coil, how it will perform. And we did Eric, and his was within about 15%, which was really, really good. The wire was off by a little bit. What we were cool enough to do is we actually wound enough coils that we could start reverse engineering the formulas. And so we took Eric's stuff and we added one more layer on top of it of I guess you call it a correction factor, or a couple little tweaks. So we got Eric's 15% down to what's closer to like 1 to 5% depending on the coil that you're making. So, but Eric got us 95% of the way there. All we had to do was make a couple practical tweaks. You could apply it. It will take some time because Eric Dollard is in the 19th century. So some of the concepts you might have to learn from a new perspective.
Yeah.
You'll have to relearn some of the concepts from his perspective. But yes, you can plug the concepts and the rough idea. You're looking from the right lens that you could take those concepts or take that paradigm and apply it to almost anything today. And not only apply it, but we could also take a lot of the other esoteric inventions that get presented at these. The EV gray motor is presented at this year, not working, but we'll say the skeleton of one, the corpse of a gray motor. And by the help of Mark McKay and some of the others, we can actually figure out with a pretty good deal of certainty how it actually, or we can form a cogent hypothesis of how it actually operated, and using fairly regular formulas, guesstimate. We have a framework to back engineer how that stuff actually worked. Whether it works in practice, that's to be done. That's what takes the actual experiments. I post on social media. I'm on Minds because I get kicked off Twitter. Yeah, it was too. I think what I say now is, I think it's consensus now, but what I said at the time was apparently too finicky. And what was funny because almost everything I post is, we'll say, engineering and science related. I basically do a day-to-day update whenever I'm working in the shop, and it's a two-way street. One, it gives me a tool to document what I'm doing, have some fun and sort of gather my thoughts to what I'm planning on doing and what I'm presenting. And it also, I get feedback on it on people that know that we're doing some cool stuff here, and the energy I get back from that gives me a little more inspiration to help finish and continue the projects. I do have a website, Hackasays.com. It's a blog on there. I do updates about once. I try to do at least every week as long as my day job allows. There's a BitChute channel on there that has most of the raw experiments that myself and Griffin do behind the scenes. I try to keep it at least high quality and somewhat entertaining. There's a lot of YouTubers that can ramble on for several hours. You want to just keep the good bits and cut out the rest. If I had anything else to say, I do have the hope that more people start doing even the most basic experimentation in the field, and that's exactly why I gave the presentation. So I hope next year, if there is a conference and if everything works out right, that there's 5 or 10 more people that built Tesla coils and they're working with them and they're up to speed, and we can start doing higher level and more sci-fi experiments with them.